Well, hello from my family's place. If you've been around this channel for a little bit, you might recognize this fireplace, but I am back at my family's house for the holidays, and that means that yesterday was a travel day, so we didn't get quite as far as I hoped on the sweater, but today we will be talking about my incredible discovery of this vintage version of the exact same sweater that I'm knitting, and kind of talking about how it is similar / different to the pattern that was written up. For those of you wondering, yes, I did travel with the last 3 candles for Craftmas, and for day 10, we have snow day for day 10, and I feel like that's a little less descriptive than lavender or persimmon. So what does snow day smell like? It definitely makes me think of like a crisp, snowy winter morning with a fireplace going, and that's maybe not very descriptive. Maybe a little bit of frankincense, maybe like a hint of pine. So it's just a really, really wonderfully cozy scent. So I'm gonna go light this candle and then we can talk a little bit about the vintage sweater. However, before I get into that, I want to thank you for all of your wonderful comments on my last video. Not only did you give me so much helpful advice for how to deal with the long floats that I have or reduce the ends I have to weave in. By the way, I am trying on the sleeves, so when the sleeves are done, we can talk about all the different methods I kind of tried from what you guys recommended. I also learned so many new terms like Armenian knitting and jacquard floats. Oh, I think that's the right term, but it's so cool and I'd never heard about that before, and it's definitely more techniques that I want to try out, so thank you. But you also gave me the encouragement to say, I don't have to rush this. I've been watching Claude's Craftmas videos and seeing where her progress is, and it's been so exciting every other day to check in with her and see where her sewing project is at. Almost it feels like you've given me the permission to do the same thing with this knitting project, and the idea to do that is just, I wish I would have thought of it myself, but that's what I find so special about being able to share this with you all, because you have these discussions and comments from me that I find so helpful and so kind. Okay, now let's get to the vintage sweater. I have so many interesting things to point out. When I saw this sweater online, I definitely knew that this sweater was based off of the pattern that I'm knitting for my ski sweater. I did have a few questions about whether the person who knit this sweater really was knitting from the pattern versus maybe they saw the design in a magazine or something and decided to copy it and interpret it in their own way, which is why there are some differences. For example, this sweater doesn't have the red triangles at the bottom, and when you look at just the pattern page, the sweater is tucked in. So you can't see that the pattern does say to knit those triangles at the bottom of the sweater. So maybe they didn't realize that that was part of it. However, I then decided to count exactly how many stitches were cast on for the front and the back, and it does match the pattern instructions exactly. And I feel like if you were trying to interpret it your own way or design a sweater pattern inspired by a picture that you saw, you probably wouldn't hit the stitch counts that exactly. And the pattern for the skier is exact to the color chart, which again, maybe you could interpret it very, very closely, but I would be surprised if you could get it down to the exact stitch per row. That was kind of my first bit of investigation, was it possible that someone was not following a pattern, or is this someone who is following a pattern just with their own twist on it? Okay, hold on. Nutella would like to be let outside, so I gotta let her outside. 1 second. You might hear some crunching footsteps. That's her enjoying the snow outside. So there's so many things to talk about in this sweater, and I was trying to think through like how maybe could I do it in a little bit more of a structured way, but I'm just going to try to go over the things that I see and make sure I don't forget anything that I noticed. First thing that jumped out to me was the bottom ribbing. Whoever knit the sweater decided that they didn't like the 1-1 ribbing at the bottom and instead decided to do 2-2. And this is the great thing about knitting patterns or sewing things or weaving things, is you can have a pattern for your instructions and your inspiration and to help you structure a garment, but you can make design decisions and changes based off of your own preferences, how you like it to fit, how you like it to look. And this knitter obviously did that. They also did knit it in pieces, exactly how the pattern suggests. So the front and back and sleeves are all knit flat and then seamed together. The next choice is, as mentioned before, to not do the red triangles at the bottom. In fact, they did the red triangles at the bottom only at the sleeves and then the diamonds in the rest of the work. And I think it's because the color work in this piece, especially when knit flat, is not the easiest, and you have a lot of floats and balls of yarn to work with. So I do think that based off of that and the decision that they decided to do with the white accents is because it makes it so much easier to work with rather than what's charted in the pattern. So what you'll notice here is that this knitter decided, instead of doing the diamond, small white diamond pattern as suggested, that's 3 rows tall, they did a 2-row tall, still 4-stitch little triangle shape instead. And why? It's because of the floats. It makes it so much easier. Like I said in my last video, to make the yarns and the color work so much easier and to carry it up the side rather than across the piece, I would personally, going back, would have added 1 row of blue work between the white, and instead this knitter decided to remove 1 white row. So when you look at the inside of the sweater, and this is another thing that I got a lot in the comments, is I would love to see the inside of the sweater and look at the color work. And that's another reason why I decided to get this piece, is because you couldn't see the inside of the work, and I was so curious what it looked like, and I want to see this knitter's techniques. And I think their color work is beautiful, the way they caught their floats. And you can see that they were able to carry up the work in their patterns up just the one side, and they decided to then sew that into the seam so you don't have those floats that you can catch on things. Their tension is wonderful. I think it was definitely pressed, and it's just, it's a beautiful piece of knitting, and it's fantastic to see that another knitter kind of, I wouldn't say struggled with this because they thought far enough ahead, or they tried it and then decided to undo it and redo it this way, to make their life easier with the color work and the patterns, and to do it the way that makes sense for them and makes it easier to work with the colors and the floats. So I like that. It's kind of, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I see a pattern or I see design and I have this need to make it exactly to that pattern and design because that would be the most accurate. But even then, people change designs to fit their own needs, their own aesthetics, and to make things make much more sense and much easier. I mean, that's just, I don't know, it's so, I feel like it's so personal and so real and so validating to see something like that. That as creators and makers, we've all been doing this throughout the time. Now, the other thing I kind of want to note is that I'm not exactly sure when this sweater was knit. It was knit sometime after the pattern was published, which was in the 1950s, and sometime before I got the sweater, which is in 2022. So I can't say that this is a sweater knit from a 1950s pattern in the 1950s, because obviously this pattern was floating around for a while, but this is still someone else knitting to this exact same vintage pattern that I'm knitting and deciding to do different choices with what they are working with. I do still think it's probably more vintage than recent, just because the yarn feeling. It's just a guess though, and I am not an authority on this, and if anyone else is, please let me know. The next thing I want to talk about is after this knitter worked on the color work for the front and the back, and I'm assuming that they probably worked in the same order as suggested in the pattern, which is to do the back first, then the front, and then you work on the sleeves. I'm doing the sleeves right now, and the sleeves also have the exact same color work design as the front and back panels in the white, and that's why it's taking me a long time. It's much slower than sleeves are usually slow for me. I'm knitting them 2 at a time, and then color work on top of it makes it that much slower progress. And they just decided to admit it completely. They said, you know, in my mind, I'm imagining that they were like, you know, I've done this 2 times now, and I have already had to adjust it because of the difficulty in how it's written and the frustration with the long floats and weaving in ends with how it's written. I'm not really willing to do it another time. Another thing that I noticed is that they did do the collar differently. I am not yet at the point of knitting the collar, but in the pattern it is written as a turtleneck. So to knit it long enough that you can fold it over, but this is maybe just 1.5 inches at most tall, and would just be worn as kind of, it almost looks like a mock neck without having that fold over. So you really don't have that turtleneck look, and I'm assuming either the knitter was short on yarn which I've done too. I've had to modify like finishing bits because I ran out of the yarn and I couldn't get more, or they decided that they didn't like the look of the turtleneck and they would rather have a shorter collar. Another thing that I noticed on this, and this is kind of something that I want to talk about in more detail, maybe in its own dedicated video, is that there are these wonderful little hiccups in this pattern. And the knitter didn't do things exactly correctly, and they still left it, and it's still a wonderfully beautiful piece. Even though you'll see sometimes there's a little bit of a hiccup in the color work where they added a little extra stitch rather than carry the float, which I also did in my back piece. I went back and I fixed it, but this knitter decided not to, and I don't think that it detracts from it. In contrast, I actually think it makes it that much more charming. Again, it makes it so much more human to me and brings such a close connection to the person who knit this, because it was their quote-unquote mistake that still made it into the final piece, and that's what makes it so that I can definitely tell that this was made by someone and not a machine. This was hand knit by someone. Another thing that I can see is something that I also struggled with. They didn't seem to have as much of an issue when they were doing the blue and white, but more the red and blue. You should catch your floats when you're knitting, but if you catch your floats in the same spot, row after row, you kind of get the caught threads peeking out in front, which is why you kind of want to stagger where you catch your threads. And a few times in the blue and red portion, the knitter caught it in the same place, so you'll see that sticking through. The other thing, and this is something that I noticed with mine as well, is that in the pattern, you can see that above the skier, you have an entire row of the red diamonds. They even managed to get another blue and white color work in before the shoulders. This knitter didn't get to that point. They even had to do half diamonds or triangles around the neckline to hit that measurement on the armholes. And I am now looking back at my front piece and thinking if maybe I should adjust mine to do the same thing, because my gauge is a little bit off. I have my armhole is longer in the front than the back because I was trying to get the entire diamonds in, whereas maybe I shouldn't do that and I should potentially pick it back so that the armholes match, or else I might get some distortion between the front and back, like these are going to be baggier. We'll see. I'll put the sweater together and then I'll put it on, and luckily I don't think it would be that much work to change it afterwards, but it's still, I don't know, it feels so validating. It's like I can see the work of someone else who faced the same challenges that I did and made different decisions than I have, and it still looks absolutely fantastic. So that's, I think, all I'm going to look at for today, just looking at this pattern right now. I will leave you with a few close-ups of different parts of this. However, if you have more questions about this sweater, or how the sweater compares to the one that I'm knitting, or how it compares to the pattern, let me know, because we still have a few days of Craftmas left, and I am more than happy to pull it out again to answer some of those questions that you have about this wonderful, wonderful piece. It just blew me away that I have been planning on knitting this sweater. It's in the same book as my gray, red, and white sweater, and I've been wanting, so it's been like 2 years since I've knit that sweater, and I've been wanting to make this one since then, and to have a vintage version pop up as available within a week of me casting on for this project that I've been planning to do for 2 years seemed so perfect. Just what a coincidence, and what a wonderful thing for us to be able to enjoy together. Once again, thank you so much for joining me in Craftmas. This has been really, really fun. I will continue to update you with my progress on knitting the sweater and potentially getting to some of the accessories for the ski set too. I can't wait to see you again really, really soon. Feel free to subscribe if you're interested in things like this. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever time it is where you are. I'll see you next time. Bye.